Victoria Harrington hurled the 127-page contract across the polished mahogany table, and it slammed into the janitor's chest before sliding to the floor at his worn boots. There, you want to prove you're more than a mop. Translate it. Every single word. If you can, I'll make you director. If you can't, pack your things and never step foot in this building again. The boardroom froze. 12 executives held their breath. Daniel Martinez slowly bent down, picked up the document, and whispered 7 words that would shatter her world forever. But what he said next made the CEO's face turn white as paper. Before we continue, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. And if you love stories where the underdog rises, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. You won't want to miss a single second of what happens next. The fluorescent lights of Harrington Tower buzzed softly on the 42nd floor, casting a pale glow over rows of empty cubicles. It was 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and most of Manhattan had gone home hours ago. But not everyone. Daniel Martinez pushed his cleaning cart down the long corridor, the squeak of one wobbly wheel, the only sound keeping him company. He was 43 years old with calloused hands, a tired back, and eyes that had seen too much. His navy blue uniform had the name Daniel stitched above the left pocket in white thread, and he wore it with quiet dignity. He stopped at the coffee station, pulled out a damp cloth, and began wiping down the counter. Crumbs. Coffee stains. A broken sugar packet leaking its contents across the marble. He cleaned it all without complaint because complaining didn't pay bills, and bills were the one thing in his life that never took a day off. "Come on, Dad, pick up." His phone vibrated in his pocket. He wiped his hands on his uniform and checked the screen. A text from his 12-year-old son, Lucas. "Dad, I'm still up. Can you read me a chapter when you get home? It's okay if you're too tired." Daniel smiled for the first time that night. His thumbs moved clumsily over the screen. "I'll be home by midnight, champ. 2 chapters. Promise." He put the phone back in his pocket and kept moving. The 42nd floor belonged to the executive team. He wasn't supposed to be up here this late, but Maria, the regular night shift supervisor, had called in sick with the flu, and Daniel had agreed to cover the executive suite as a favor. Extra hours meant extra money. Extra money meant Lucas could go on that science camp trip in July. That was all the motivation Daniel needed. As he pushed his cart closer to the main boardroom, he heard voices. Loud voices. Sharp voices. He paused. The boardroom door was cracked open just an inch, and yellow light spilled out into the hallway. He could hear a woman's voice, high-pitched and furious, cutting through the silence like broken glass. "I don't care if it's midnight. I don't care if it's Christmas morning. I need this contract understood by tomorrow at 8 a.m. A man's voice, quieter, tried to respond. "Victoria, the translator we hired, bailed on us 2 hours ago. There's no one. Then find someone." Daniel gripped the handle of his cart tighter. He knew that voice. Everyone in the building did. Victoria Harrington, CEO of Harrington Global. 48 years old. Ivy League educated, ruthless in ways that had made her the subject of 3 magazine cover stories and 2 private lawsuits from former employees. Daniel had passed her exactly once in the elevator 6 months ago. She hadn't looked at him. He hadn't expected her to. He started to move past the door, determined to mind his own business. But then he heard it. Diese Vereinbarung beinhaltet eine versteckte Haftungsklausel. Daniel's feet stopped moving. His heart skipped. He understood every word. The voice on the other side of the door, probably a speakerphone, was reading aloud from the German contract. And what they had just said translated to, "This agreement contains a hidden liability clause." A woman inside the boardroom groaned. "What the hell does that even mean? Can anyone here make sense of this?" Silence. Daniel stood frozen in the hallway. Part of him wanted to keep walking. Part of him wanted to knock. "Keep your head down, Daniel. Don't get involved. Not your business. Not your world." That's what his late wife Elena used to tell him in her soft, lilting voice, back when she was still alive, and their little family still had its third leg. "Cariño, you know too much for your own good. Smart men get punished in this country for knowing too much." But Elena had been gone for 4 years now. Cancer. And Lucas was waiting at home for his father to come tuck him in. And somewhere deep inside Daniel's chest, something old and stubborn refused to let him walk away. He took one step forward, then another. He reached the cracked door and gently, respectfully knocked. The voices inside stopped. "Who is it?" Victoria's voice snapped. "We're in the middle of something." Daniel pushed the door open a few inches. "I'm sorry to interrupt, ma'am. I'm the janitor. I was just cleaning this floor and—" "Oh, for God's sake!" Victoria threw her hands up. "Get out, now!" Daniel didn't move. His voice stayed calm. "Ma'am, I couldn't help but overhear. I think I may be able to—" "You think you can— what?" The door swung fully open. Victoria Harrington stood there in a charcoal Armani suit, blonde hair pulled back tight, makeup perfect even at 10 o'clock at night, a vein throbbing visibly on her temple. Behind her, Daniel counted 12 executives sitting around a long, glossy table. Their faces ranged from exhausted to embarrassed to mildly amused. One of them, a younger man with a thin mustache, snickered. "Oh, this should be good." Victoria stared at Daniel, up and down, taking in the cheap uniform, the cleaning cart behind him, the rubber-soled shoes. "Let me get this straight," she said slowly. "You, the janitor. You think you can help us with a 127-page German merger contract worth $340 million. Daniel's throat went dry. He had two choices: back away, apologize, keep his job, keep his paycheck, keep his quiet, invisible little life, or stand his ground. He thought about Lucas, about that science camp, about the way his son still asked every single night, "When are we going to go back to Germany? Dad, like when I was little." He squared his shoulders. "Yes, ma'am, I believe I can." The boardroom burst into laughter. Burst. The young man with the mustache actually slapped the table. "Oh my God, Victoria, please let him try. I need this. Everybody needs this right now." "Brandon, shut up," Victoria snapped. But she didn't take her eyes off Daniel. There was something new in her gaze now. Not respect, not warmth. Just curiosity, the kind a cat has when it finds a wounded mouse. "What's your name?" she asked. "Daniel Martinez, ma'am." "Daniel Martinez, the janitor, who speaks German." Her lips curled into a thin, mocking smile. "Is that what you're telling this room?" "Yes, ma'am." "How—" Daniel paused. He didn't want to explain. He had spent 15 years not explaining, but the room was waiting. "I studied Germanic linguistics, ma'am. University of Heidelberg. I was working on my doctoral thesis when—" He stopped himself. The rest wasn't her business. "I speak fluent German. I also speak Dutch, Swedish, and conversational Norwegian. I've worked with contract documents before. If you'd let me look at your contract, I could tell you within 10 minutes whether I can help." The laughter had died. Every executive was now staring at him. The young man with the mustache, Brandon, wasn't smiling anymore. He leaned back in his chair and muttered, "Holy—" Victoria held up a hand. Wait. She stepped back into the boardroom and looked at her team, then back at Daniel. "You're telling me you have a linguistics degree from one of the most prestigious universities in Europe, and you're pushing a mop in my building?" Daniel felt the old familiar flush of shame creep up his neck, but he refused to look away. "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" "That's personal, ma'am. Everything about this is personal now, Daniel." Her voice dropped lower, sharper. "Because if you're lying to me, if you're standing there pretending to be something you're not, just to get a little attention, I will have you escorted out of this building, and I will make sure you never work another janitorial job in Manhattan. Am I understood?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then tell me, why are you cleaning my toilets, Mr. Heidelberg?" Daniel's jaw tightened. His hand, still gripping the edge of the cart, flexed once. "My wife got sick," he said quietly. "Cancer. I left my academic career to take care of her. I used up all our savings. When she passed, my son needed stability. He needed a father who came home every night at the same time. A janitor's job gave me that. It gave him that. I don't regret it, ma'am. Not for 1 second." The room was dead silent. Brandon looked down at his hands. A woman at the far end of the table Daniel noticed was blinking rapidly. Victoria didn't blink. "Okay, Daniel Martinez." She walked back to the table, picked up the heavy stack of papers, all 127 pages of dense German legal text, and held it up. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to come over here. You're going to sit down at this table with my executives, and you're going to translate this document for us. Out loud. Right now." Daniel swallowed. "Ma'am, a document this size normally takes—" "I don't care what it normally takes." She threw the contract. It hit Daniel in the chest hard and slid down to the floor at his boots. "There, you want to prove you're more than a mop. Translate it, every single word. If you can, I'll make you Director of International Contracts. If you can't, pack your things and never step foot in this building again." The room gasped. Brandon sat up straight. "Victoria, you can't just—" "I can do whatever I want. Brandon, because I own this building. I sign your paychecks, and right now the company I've spent 22 years building is bleeding money while we sit here playing guessing games with a $340 million deal that closes in 10 hours. She whirled back toward Daniel. "Well, Mr. Heidelberg, are you going to stand there, or are you going to sit down?" Daniel slowly bent down. He picked up the contract. He brushed off the first page with the back of his hand like he was wiping dust off something sacred. He stepped into the boardroom. 12 pairs of eyes tracked his every movement. He walked to the empty chair at the far end of the table, the chair furthest from Victoria, and sat down. His cleaning cart stayed in the hallway, abandoned like a piece of a past life. He opened the contract to the first page. His eyes scanned the dense technical German. He took a slow breath, and then, in a calm, measured voice, Daniel Martinez began to read aloud. "This agreement, dated the 15th of October, is entered into by and between Harrington Global Holdings, a corporation organized under the laws of the state of Delaware, and Bauer Steinmann, GmbH, a limited liability company, organized under the laws of the Federal Republic of Germany, hereinafter referred to as the acquirer and the target respectively." His translation was smooth, effortless. He wasn't just reading words, he was speaking them in English as if they had always been in English. No stumbling, no pauses, no searching for meaning. Brandon slowly reached for his coffee cup, his eyes never leaving Daniel. A woman near the middle of the table, a sharp-featured brunette in a navy blazer, began scribbling furiously on a legal pad. Victoria stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, watching. Daniel continued. Section 1.1 Definitions. The term material adverse effect shall mean any change, event, occurrence, or state of facts which has had or would reasonably be expected to have a material adverse effect on the business operations, assets, liabilities, financial condition, or prospects of the target taken as a whole. He was 3 pages in, then 5, then 8. He didn't stop. He didn't ask for water. He didn't even look up. Brandon leaned over and whispered something to the brunette. She nodded, still writing. Daniel reached page 14. Then he paused. The room held its breath. Daniel tilted his head slightly. Read the paragraph again. In his mind, not out loud. Then he spoke, but his voice had changed. It was quieter now, more focused, almost careful. "Ma'am." Victoria stiffened. "What?" Daniel looked up from the page. His brown eyes met hers directly. "This clause, right here, section 3.2, subsection C." He tapped the page. "Are you aware of what this says?" Victoria frowned. "I was told it's a standard non-compete clause." Daniel shook his head slowly. "It's not a non-compete clause, ma'am, not even close." Brandon put down his coffee cup. "What is it then?" Daniel's voice was calm but firm. "It's a liability transfer provision, written in legal German so archaic that even a native speaker would need an expert to catch it. According to this clause, the moment you sign this contract, Harrington Global inherits all existing lawsuits, pending litigation, and outstanding environmental cleanup obligations of Bauer Steinmann, GmbH, including any that haven't been publicly disclosed yet." The brunette stopped writing. Brandon's face turned pale. Victoria's arms uncrossed. "Say that again," she said slowly. Daniel didn't blink. "Ma'am, if you sign this contract tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., your company doesn't just buy their assets. You buy every single thing they've ever done wrong, every secret, every debt, every lawsuit they've been hiding for the last decade." The boardroom went absolutely completely silent. Somewhere a clock ticked. Daniel set the contract gently on the table. His hands were steady. His face was calm. But inside his chest, his heart was pounding like a drum, because he knew he could feel it in the air that the next thing Victoria Harrington said would change his life forever, one way or the other. She uncrossed her arms fully, walked slowly down the length of the long table, pulled out the chair directly across from him, sat down, put her elbows on the table, looked him dead in the eye, and said in a voice softer than anyone in that room had ever heard from her before, "Daniel, keep reading. Don't stop until you've gone through every single page, and God help anyone in this room who interrupts him." Daniel nodded once. He turned back to page 14, and he kept reading. Daniel turned back to page 14, but before he could speak, Brandon stood up so suddenly that his chair scraped loudly against the floor. Hold on. Victoria, we need to call Klein and Associates right now, tonight. If what he's saying is true..." "Sit down, Brandon." "But Victoria?" "I said sit down." Brandon sat down. Victoria didn't take her eyes off Daniel. "I don't need Klein and Associates. I'm sitting across from a man who just caught something that our $30,000 a day legal team missed. Daniel, I want you to keep going. And every single time you find something like that clause, I want you to stop and tell this room exactly what it means. In plain English, like I'm a 7-year-old child." Daniel nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "And Brandon?" "Yes?" "Get him a glass of water. Now." Brandon blinked, as if he hadn't expected to be spoken to. Then he stood up, walked across the boardroom to the small wet bar in the corner, and poured a glass of water from the pitcher. He walked the full length of the table and set it down in front of Daniel with more care than he'd probably ever given anything in his life. "Thank you," Daniel said quietly. Brandon nodded, swallowed, and returned to his seat. Daniel took a small sip, set the glass down, turned to page 15. For the next 23 minutes, he translated without stopping. He moved through the pages with a fluency that almost seemed impossible. The sharp-featured brunette, whose name Daniel later learned was Catherine Yamaguchi, the company's chief operating officer, was writing notes so fast that her pen tore through the first page of her legal pad, and she had to flip to a fresh sheet twice. At one point, an older executive at the far end of the table, a silver-haired man named Richard Kendrick, muttered under his breath, "Jesus Christ, he's not even looking at the page anymore." It was true. Daniel had started reading directly in English, his eyes moving over the German text, at a pace that made it look like he was scanning a menu at a familiar restaurant. The words came out of his mouth in fluid, polished English, with the cadence and rhythm of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Then, on page 31, he stopped. He stopped so abruptly that Catherine's pen hovered mid-sentence. "Ma'am." Victoria leaned forward. Another one. "Talk to me." Daniel took a breath. "This is a payment structure clause. It looks standard at first glance. It says the total purchase price of $340 million will be paid in 3 installments over 18 months. Right. That was the original agreement. Yes, ma'am. But buried in the middle of this paragraph, there's a single German phrase, Zinsstaffelregelung mit aufgeschobener Fälligkeit. It's a cascading interest clause with deferred maturity." He looked up. "What that means in plain English is this: if Harrington Global misses even one payment by a single day, the remaining balance doesn't just get charged late fees. The entire purchase price doubles." "Doubles?" Victoria repeated, like she hadn't heard correctly. "Yes, ma'am. $680 million. Payable within 30 days. And if you can't pay it within 30 days, the contract automatically converts the target Bauer Steinman into the majority shareholder of Harrington Global." Richard Kendrick slammed his hand down on the table so hard that 3 coffee cups jumped. "That's a hostile takeover dressed up as a merger." "That's what it is, sir," Daniel said calmly. "Yes." Victoria stared at him for a long moment. Then she turned to Catherine. "Did Klein flag any of this?" Catherine looked pale. "No, not a word. Not a single word." "No, Victoria." Victoria closed her eyes, took a long, steady breath, opened them again. "Daniel, keep going. I want to know everything. Every single trap in this document. Every single thing they thought they could hide from us. I don't care if we're here until sunrise." Daniel nodded and turned to page 32. He kept reading. By page 48, he had found 3 more dangerous clauses. One involving intellectual property rights that would have transferred all of Harrington's proprietary technology to Bauer Steinman for a period of 5 years, under something called a temporary licensing agreement. Another involving non-disclosure penalties that would have cost the company $50 million for any public statement made about the merger without prior written consent from the German firm. And a third involving pension obligations for Bauer Steinmann's retired workforce in East Germany. A financial liability that by Daniel's quick mental calculation would exceed $70 million over the next decade. At page 52, Brandon raised his hand like a student in class. "Can I ask something?" Victoria nodded once. Brandon turned to Daniel. "How are you doing this? I mean, how the hell are you doing this? Our lawyers went through this contract for weeks. How did you find 4 massive red flags in less than 2 hours?" Daniel took a sip of his water. Set the glass down. "Because your lawyers are American, sir. They read German the way a tourist reads a map. They understand the words, but they don't understand the land. German legal drafting has its own tradition, its own rhythm. When something important is being hidden, it's almost always hidden in the subordinate clauses. In English, you put your important qualifiers up front. In German, you bury them at the end of a very long sentence, often separated from the main subject by 50 or 60 words. An American lawyer reads a German contract sentence by sentence. A German lawyer reads it paragraph by paragraph. I was trained to read it the German way." Brandon stared at him. "And where exactly did you get this training?" Daniel hesitated. Victoria leaned forward. "Answer him, Daniel." "I spent 7 years in Germany, sir. I went to Heidelberg on a Fulbright scholarship when I was 22. I completed my master's degree in 2 years. I was 3 semesters into my doctoral program when I met my wife, Elena. She was from Mexico City studying art history at the same university. We got married. We had our son, Lucas, while we were still in Germany. He was born in a little hospital in Freiburg. My doctoral thesis was on the evolution of Middle-High German legal language from the 14th through 16th centuries. I was halfway through writing it when Elena was diagnosed with stage 3 cervical cancer. We came back to the United States for treatment. I never finished the thesis." The room was quiet. Catherine set down her pen. Daniel continued more quietly. "Elena fought for 4 years. I took care of her, and I took care of Lucas. I worked whatever jobs I could find that had flexible hours, night shifts, weekend shifts, anything that let me be at her appointments during the day. When she passed, Lucas was 8. He didn't have anyone else. I didn't have anyone else. I took a janitorial job because it was steady, it was honest, and it let me be home in the morning when he woke up and home at night when he went to bed. That's all." "That's all?" Victoria repeated softly. "Yes, ma'am." Victoria looked down at her hands for a long moment. When she looked up again, there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Not quite respect, not quite guilt, but something close to both. "Daniel." "Yes, ma'am." "I owe you an apology." Brandon's head snapped up. Richard Kendrick coughed into his fist. Daniel got the distinct impression that Victoria Harrington had not apologized to another human being in a very, very long time. "An hour ago," she continued, "I threw a contract at you like you were a dog I was trying to scare out of my yard. I mocked your profession. I said things in front of my executives that were designed to humiliate you. And you stood there and you kept your dignity and you have since that moment quite possibly saved this company from the worst deal of its entire existence. So I am saying this publicly in front of every person in this room. I am sorry. I was wrong about you. I was wrong about what I thought you were." Daniel swallowed. His eyes stung, but he did not let the tears come. "Thank you, ma'am." "Now." She sat up straighter. "Keep reading." Daniel turned to page 53. He kept going. Around 11:45, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out quickly, glanced at the screen, and his face fell. Victoria noticed. "What is it?" "My son, ma'am. I told him I'd be home by midnight." "Call him." "Ma'am, I can wait until—" "Daniel, call your son. Now. This room can wait 5 minutes." Daniel stood up, walked to the corner of the room, and pressed the phone to his ear. The executives politely pretended not to listen, but the boardroom was quiet enough that everyone could hear every word. "Hey, champ." A small voice came through the phone. "Dad, you okay? You said midnight." "I know, buddy. I'm so sorry. Something came up at work. Something important. I'm going to be home later than I thought. Maybe a lot later. Are you in trouble?" Daniel laughed a short, tired, grateful laugh. "No, buddy. I'm actually okay. Really okay. I'll tell you about it when I get home. Did you already go to sleep?" "I was waiting up." "Lucas, it's almost midnight. On a school night. You gotta get to bed." "I know. I was just worried. You always come home on time." Daniel closed his eyes. His voice got softer. "I love you, Lucas. I love you more than anything in the whole world. You know that, right?" "Yeah, Dad." "Go to sleep. I promise I'll be there when you wake up. I'll make you breakfast. Chocolate chip pancakes. Sound good?" "Really?" "Really." "Okay. Love you, Dad." "Love you, champ." Daniel hung up. He stood there for a moment with his back to the room, composing himself. When he turned around, every single executive was looking at him with something he didn't know what to name. It wasn't pity. It wasn't admiration. It was something quieter, something harder to define. He walked back to his seat and sat down. "I'm sorry, ma'am." "Don't apologize, Daniel." Victoria's voice was different now. "Don't ever apologize for loving your child." She looked around the table. "Catherine, Richard, I want Klein on the phone in the next 10 minutes. Wake him up, tell him to get dressed, get in his car, and get to this building before 1 a.m. I want every single clause that Daniel has flagged to be documented, notarized if necessary, and cross-referenced with the original German text before 8 a.m. tomorrow. If we're pulling out of this deal, and I'm 99% sure we are, I want every legal protection in place. Do you understand me?" "Yes, Victoria." "Brandon." "Yes, Victoria. Get a catering order in. I don't care who's open at midnight. Find somebody. Sandwiches. Coffee. Something hot. Whatever Daniel wants, ask him. This room doesn't leave this floor until he's finished, and we're not going to let him starve while he does it." "On it." Brandon stood and left the room, already dialing. Catherine was on her phone in the hallway, her voice low and urgent as she spoke to someone who was presumably Mr. Klein of Klein and Associates. Richard Kendrick, the silver-haired man at the far end of the table, stood up and walked over to Daniel. He held out his hand. "Richard Kendrick, Chief Financial Officer, 28 years with this company." Daniel stood and shook his hand. "Daniel Martinez. Mr. Martinez, I've worked with some of the best contract attorneys in the world. Yale, Harvard, Oxford. I have never in my entire career seen anyone read a contract like you just did." He paused. "I don't know what you're getting paid as a janitor, but whatever it is, it's a crime." Daniel looked down, embarrassed. "It pays the bills, sir." "Not anymore, it doesn't." Richard glanced over at Victoria. "If she doesn't hire you, I will. I'll create a position for you myself." Victoria's lips twitched almost a smile. "Richard, get back in your seat." "Yes, Victoria." He went back to his seat. Daniel sat back down and turned to page 53 for the third time. He kept reading. By the time Brandon came back with trays of sandwiches and a carafe of coffee at 12:22 a.m., Daniel had reached page 71 and flagged 2 more dangerous clauses. One was a foreign exchange clause that would have locked Harrington Global into the euro at a fixed rate of $1.32 per euro, a rate that was currently 1.08 and falling. Over the 18-month payment schedule, that single clause alone would have cost the company an estimated $32 million in currency losses. The other was more subtle. A small paragraph on page 68 that granted Bauer-Steinmann the right to audit Harrington Global's financial records for a period of 5 years, following the merger, under the pretense of ensuring continuity of financial obligations. What it really meant, Daniel explained, was that Bauer-Steinmann would have legal access to all of Harrington's internal financial data, including proprietary cost structures, vendor contracts, and profit margins, for half a decade. They'd be handing their biggest competitor a 5-year playbook on how to undercut you, Daniel said. In the Bauer-Steinmann parent company's primary market, industrial equipment manufacturing, they could destroy your margin in 3 years. Victoria was no longer sitting. She was standing, pacing. Her heels clicked slowly on the hardwood floor. She stopped in the middle of the room and looked at the ceiling. "I almost signed this," she said mostly to herself. Nobody answered. "Tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., I was going to stand in front of the board and sign this document in front of our shareholders. I was going to celebrate it with champagne. I was going to go on CNBC on Friday and brag about the biggest acquisition of my career." She let out a short, bitter laugh. "I was going to ruin my own company." Richard Kendrick cleared his throat. "Victoria, you didn't ruin anything. We stopped it." "We didn't stop it, Richard. He did." She turned and looked at Daniel. "A janitor stopped it. A man I almost threw out of this building 2 hours ago." Daniel didn't know what to say, so he didn't say anything. Victoria walked over to the wet bar in the corner, pulled out a bottle of bourbon, poured herself a small glass, drank it in one swallow, set the glass down carefully. Then she walked back to her seat at the head of the table. "Daniel, how much more of this contract do you have to translate?" Daniel looked down at the stack of pages. 56 more pages, ma'am." "How long?" "Another hour and a half, maybe 2. "Can you do it?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then do it." Daniel picked up the contract and turned to page 72. But before he could start, Catherine Yamaguchi came back into the boardroom. Her face was tight, concerned. "Victoria, Klein is on his way, but I just spoke to someone else too." "Who?" "Their German counsel, the lead attorney for Bauer-Steinmann, Hans Richter." Victoria's head came up sharply. "What did he say?" "He's already on a plane, Victoria. He left Frankfurt 6 hours ago. He's landing at JFK at 1:15 a.m., and he's coming straight here, unannounced." The room went still. Victoria's jaw tightened. "Why?" "He told me very politely that he wants to be present when we sign the contract tomorrow morning. He said he wanted to make sure, quote, everything is properly understood." Daniel's eyes narrowed. Brandon frowned. "That's weird, right? I mean, they never said anything about him flying out. Why would the head German attorney fly 15 hours across the Atlantic to watch us sign a document that our own lawyers already reviewed?" Daniel spoke quietly. "Because he knows." Every head turned toward him. "He knows what?" Victoria asked. Daniel set the contract down. He folded his hands on the table. His voice was calm, measured, steady. But there was something underneath it now, something harder. "He knows that no American lawyer would have caught what's in this contract, ma'am. He's flying in because he wants to be in the room when Harrington Global signs its own death certificate. He wants to see your face when you put your signature down thinking you just made history. They've been planning this for months, maybe years. This isn't a merger, ma'am. This is an execution." Richard Kendrick muttered, "My God." Victoria's face had gone pale. "He lands at 1:15, she said slowly. "That gives us, 6 hours until he gets to this building?" "About that, yes," Catherine said. "Then here's what we're going to do." Victoria's voice was steel now. Ice. She had fully returned to herself, not the ruthless CEO who had thrown the contract at Daniel, but a sharper version of her, a more dangerous version. Daniel is going to finish translating this document. Klein is going to arrive and document everything we've found. At 6 a.m., I'm going to get on the phone with our board and explain exactly what just happened in this room tonight. At 7 a.m., I'm going to personally fax a letter to Bauer Steinmann's corporate office in Munich, terminating all merger discussions effective immediately. And at 8 a.m., when Hans Richter walks through the front doors of this building, expecting to watch us sign, I'm going to be the one standing in the lobby to meet him. Theo. She paused. And when he asks me why we're pulling out, I'm going to hand him a 127-page document, in perfect English, with every single one of his little traps highlighted in yellow marker. And I'm going to tell him very politely that the man who translated it for me, she looked at Daniel, is my new director of international contracts. Daniel didn't move. He didn't know what to say. He just stared at her, his hands still resting on the contract, and for the first time all night, his composure cracked. Just a little. Just enough for a single tear to slide down his cheek before he could wipe it away. Victoria saw it. She said nothing. She simply nodded at him one single nod and then gestured to the contract. Keep reading, Daniel. Daniel wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. He picked up the contract. He turned to page 72, and he kept reading. At 12:47 a.m., the boardroom door opened, and a short, bald man in a rumpled gray suit walked in, carrying a leather briefcase that looked older than most of the executives in the room. His tie was crooked. His eyes were red from being pulled out of bed. But his voice was sharp and focused. Victoria, tell me somebody is dying because that's the only excuse I'm going to accept for being pulled out of my house at midnight. Victoria stood. Michael, thank you for coming. Thank me when I see a check. What's the situation? Victoria gestured to Daniel. Michael Klein, this is Daniel Martinez. Daniel, this is Michael Klein, senior partner at Klein & Associates, our lead corporate counsel. Michael Klein looked at Daniel, looked at the uniform, looked at the name stitched over the pocket, looked at Victoria. Is this a joke? No, Michael. Because if this is a joke, I'm leaving. I don't do jokes at 1 a.m. Sit down, Michael. He sat down. Victoria walked over to him, placed her hand on the back of his chair, and leaned down close to his ear. Michael, in the last 3 hours, this man has found 7 major red flags in the Bauer-Steinmann contract. Red flags that your firm missed. Red flags that would have bankrupted this company within 24 months. Michael Klein went very still. That's not possible. It is possible, Michael. He has proven it to me, to Catherine, to Richard, and to every other person in this room. You are going to sit here, and you are going to listen to him explain every single clause he has flagged, and you are going to take notes, and then you are going to tell me, in your professional opinion, whether this man is right or wrong. Do you understand? Victoria, my firm has reviewed this. I know your firm has reviewed this, Michael. That's the problem. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Now sit there and listen, and for God's sake, try to be useful. Michael Klein opened his briefcase, pulled out a legal pad, uncapped a pen, and looked at Daniel. Mr. Martinez, start from the beginning. Daniel took a breath. He picked up the contract. He turned back to page 14, section 3.2, subsection C. Originally translated to the client as a standard non-compete provision. Actual content, a liability transfer provision, written in archaic legal German that inherits all existing lawsuits, pending litigation, and undisclosed environmental obligations of Bauer-Steinmann, GmbH, upon signing. Estimated exposure unknown, but based on Bauer-Steinmann's publicly available environmental citations over the last decade, I would estimate between $80 and $120 million in cleanup costs alone. Michael Klein's pen moved across the legal pad. Daniel continued. Section 7.1, paragraph 4. Payment Structure Clause. Originally translated as a 3-installment schedule over 18 months. Actual content, cascading interest provision with deferred maturity. If any payment is missed by a single day, the entire remaining balance doubles and becomes payable within 30 days, with the failure to pay triggering automatic conversion of Bauer-Steinmann into the majority shareholder of Harrington Global. Michael Klein stopped writing. He looked up. Say that again. Daniel said it again. Michael Klein looked at Victoria. Victoria said nothing. Michael Klein looked back at Daniel. Keep going, Mr. Martinez. Daniel kept going. For the next 40 minutes, he walked Michael Klein through every single clause he had flagged. The intellectual property transfer disguised as a temporary licensing agreement. The $50 million non-disclosure penalty. The pension obligations for the East German retired workforce. The foreign exchange rate trap. The 5-year financial audit provision. By the time Daniel finished, Michael Klein had filled 7 pages of his legal pad, and his hand was trembling. He set down his pen. He took off his glasses. He rubbed his eyes. Victoria. Yes, Michael. My firm almost, oh my God. I know. My firm, I have personally signed off on this contract. My name is on the attestation letter. If this had been signed, my firm would have been liable for everything. I would have lost my license, my partners, 50 attorneys, my entire practice. Michael. He looked up at her. His eyes were wet. Michael, nobody signed it. Okay, nothing happened. We caught it. You're fine. The firm is fine. Everyone is fine, because of him. She pointed at Daniel. Michael Klein turned to Daniel. He stood up slowly. He walked over to Daniel. He extended his hand. Mr. Martinez, I have been practicing international corporate law for 31 years. I have 3 partners who are former federal judges. I have associates from the best law schools in the country. And I am telling you right now, in front of all these witnesses, you are the most gifted contract analyst I have ever met in my entire career. I don't know how you became a janitor. I don't care. Whatever you are being paid right now in this moment is not enough. It will never be enough. I am in your debt, sir. Daniel shook his hand. Thank you, Mr. Klein. Call me Michael. Michael. Michael Klein walked back to his seat, sat down heavily, put his face in his hands for a moment, then looked up at Victoria. What's the plan? Daniel finishes translating the rest of the contract. You document every finding. 7 a.m. I send the termination letter to Munich. 8 a.m. Hans Richter arrives and finds me waiting for him. Michael Klein's eyebrows went up. Richter's coming here. He's on a plane right now. My God, they're going for the jugular. They were going for the jugular, Michael. They're not anymore. Michael Klein nodded slowly. What do you need from me? I need you to draft a termination notice in both English and German, citing material, misrepresentation, and breach of good faith negotiations. I want it on my desk by 6 a.m. I want a parallel filing prepared for the Frankfurt Commercial Court in case they try to sue us for pulling out. And I want a confidential memo to the board documenting every single thing that happened in this room tonight. Understood. Good. Now let the man finish his work. Daniel turned to page 72. He kept reading. By 1:30 in the morning, the boardroom had taken on a strange, almost surreal quality. Exhausted executives sat with loosened ties and half-eaten sandwiches. Catherine Yamaguchi had moved to the floor, her back against the wall, her laptop balanced on her knees, typing furiously. Brandon had taken off his suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves. Richard Kendrick had quietly slipped out at one point and returned with a bottle of aspirin, offering it around the table like candy. Daniel kept translating. He found 2 more clauses. Nothing as catastrophic as the earlier ones, but still significant, a warranty provision that would have required Harrington Global to guarantee the continued employment of all Bauer-Steinmann senior management for a period of 7 years, and a mandatory arbitration clause that would have required any future disputes to be resolved in a specific court in Dusseldorf under German law, with the panel of arbitrators selected exclusively by Bauer-Steinmann. So even if we won a dispute, Daniel explained, we wouldn't really be winning. The system was designed so that we would lose by default. Michael Klein shook his head. It's elegant, I'll give them that. It's the most elegantly hostile contract I've ever read in my life. At 1:47, Daniel turned to the final page, page 127. He read it silently. Then he read it again. Then he set the contract down. Victoria was sitting across from him, her chin resting on her folded hands. What is it, Daniel? Daniel took a long breath. Ma'am, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I'm listening. The signature page. Page 127. It's written in German. Yes. But there's a single English sentence at the bottom. Victoria leaned forward. What does it say? Daniel read it aloud. By signing below, the acquirer acknowledges that they have reviewed and understood the contents of this agreement in its original language and waive all rights to subsequent claims based on linguistic misinterpretation. The room went quiet. Michael Klein closed his eyes. Oh, those sons of... I don't understand, Brandon said. Daniel looked at him. It means, sir, that the moment Ms. Harrington would have signed this contract, she would have legally acknowledged that she had reviewed and understood every word in the original German, even though she doesn't speak German, and she would have waived the right to ever claim otherwise in a court of law. Any misinterpretation, any trap, any hidden clause by her own signature, she would have agreed that she understood them all. There would be no recourse, no lawsuit, no appeal, nothing. Victoria was very still. Daniel set the contract down carefully. Ma'am, I've been reading contracts for 20 years. I've seen a lot of things. This is the most carefully constructed trap I have ever seen in my life. Whoever designed this was not just trying to make a deal. They were trying to destroy your company, and they were counting on the fact that no one on your side would read the German carefully enough to catch it. They counted on your pride. They counted on the fact that a CEO of your stature wouldn't admit she didn't fully understand a document she was about to sign. They counted on the fact that your legal team would defer to their legal team. Every single aspect of this contract was engineered to humiliate and destroy Harrington Global. Nobody spoke. Victoria's hands were trembling slightly. She folded them together to still them. Daniel. Yes, ma'am. How do we stop this tomorrow? I mean, really stop it. Not just pull out. Because if we just pull out, Richter flies home and they try again with another American company. Another CEO who doesn't know better. Another legal team that doesn't catch it. And somewhere out there another company dies. Michael Klein leaned forward. Victoria, we don't have a legal obligation to... I'm not talking about legal obligation, Michael. I'm talking about moral obligation. I'm talking about the fact that a man who cleans our toilets saved my company's life tonight. And if I just pull out and pretend nothing happened, I'm no better than the men in Munich who drew this contract up. Daniel looked at her carefully. Ma'am, if you want to stop this from happening to anyone else, I have an idea. Tell me. Daniel took a breath. Tomorrow morning when Hans Richter arrives, you don't just tell him the deal is off. You invite him into this boardroom. You sit him down at this exact table. And you have me, not you, not Michael, not Catherine, walk him through every single clause he hid in that contract, in German. So he knows without any doubt that we know. And then you tell him that if he ever attempts this same contract with another American company, if even a single paragraph of this language appears in another merger agreement with a U.S. firm, Harrington Global will personally fund the legal defense of that company. We will make sure every law firm in the country has a copy of this contract fully translated with every trap highlighted. We will make it impossible for Bauer Steinman to ever do this again. Victoria stared at him. You want me to declare war on a German corporation? I want you to protect other people, ma'am. Do you know how much that would cost? I know what it would save, ma'am. Victoria looked around the table. Richard Kendrick nodded slowly. He's right, Victoria. Catherine nodded. He's right. Brandon nodded. He's right. Michael Klein sighed. I don't want to say it, but he's right. Victoria closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them, she looked at Daniel. Okay, Daniel. Okay, ma'am. Okay, we'll do it your way. She stood up. Daniel Martinez. In front of every person in this room, I am making you the following offer. Director of International Contracts and Translations. A seat on the Executive Committee. Full medical benefits for you and your son. A relocation package that includes housing assistance. A starting salary of $450,000 per year with performance bonuses that could bring total compensation to 7 figures. A company car. 3 weeks of paid vacation. Full tuition coverage for your son's education from here through any college, any graduate school, anywhere in the world. And most importantly, the authority to personally review every international contract that comes through this company with veto power over any deal you believe is not in the company's best interest. Daniel didn't move. He didn't breathe. Victoria waited. Daniel. Daniel's voice was hoarse. Ma'am. Yes, Daniel. I don't know what to say. Say yes. Daniel looked down at his hands. His calloused, cracked janitor's hands. Hands that had pushed a mop for 15 years. Hands that had held Elena's thin, dying fingers in a hospital room. Hands that had lifted Lucas up and carried him to bed 1,000 nights in a row. He looked up. Ma'am, before I say anything, I need to tell you something. Tell me. I don't want this job because of the money. I know you don't, Daniel. I want this job because tonight, for the first time in 15 years, I remembered who I used to be. I remembered that I used to have a mind. I used to have a voice. I used to matter. Not just to Elena, not just to Lucas, but to the world. And I thought that man died when my wife died. I thought I buried him. But I didn't. He was still here. He's been here the whole time, pushing a mop and waiting for somebody to ask him a question he actually knew the answer to. His voice cracked. If I say yes to this job, ma'am, I'm not saying yes to the salary. I'm not saying yes to the title. I'm saying yes to the chance to be that man again. For me. For my son. For my wife's memory. I want to make her proud. She gave up her career to follow me to America. She never once complained. And I never got to finish what I started. I never got to become the man she believed I could be. Tears were running down his face now. He didn't wipe them away. If you're offering me a second chance at the life I walked away from, ma'am, then yes. My answer is yes. The boardroom was silent. Catherine Yamaguchi was crying quietly. Richard Kendrick was staring at the ceiling, blinking hard. Brandon had turned away from the table, his shoulders shaking. Michael Klein took off his glasses and pressed them against his forehead. Victoria walked the length of the table slowly. She stopped next to Daniel's chair. She extended her hand. Daniel Martinez, welcome to Harrington Global. Daniel stood up. He took her hand. They shook. And then Victoria did something that no one in that boardroom, no one in the entire company had ever seen her do before. She pulled Daniel into a hug. It was brief. It was awkward. It was the kind of hug that a woman who hasn't hugged anyone in a very long time gives when she doesn't quite remember how. But it was real. When she stepped back, her eyes were wet. Daniel? Yes, ma'am. Call me Victoria. Daniel nodded. Yes, Victoria. Now, go home. He blinked. Ma'am? Go home, Daniel. It's 2 a.m. Your son is asleep. You promised him chocolate chip pancakes in the morning. I don't want to be the reason he doesn't get them. But the contract Richter is coming at 8. Michael and I will handle the paperwork. You need sleep. You need to see your son. And tomorrow morning at 7:30 a.m. I want you back here wearing whatever you'd like, ready to sit across the table from Hans Richter, and explain in his native language exactly why his contract is going to fail. Daniel's voice was barely a whisper. Victoria, I don't have a suit. Victoria smiled. It was the first genuine, unguarded smile she had shown all night. Brandon. Yes. I want you to escort Daniel home. Use my driver. Take the company car. Get his address. Pick him up tomorrow morning at 6:30 sharp. And on the way here, stop at Barney's. I know a tailor there who owes me a favor. I don't care if he has to come in before the store opens. I want Daniel in a navy suit, white shirt, burgundy tie, and polished black Oxfords when he walks into this building. Is that understood? Yes, Victoria? Good. Daniel felt dizzy. Everything was happening too fast. His life, the shape of it, the weight of it, was shifting in real time. 3 hours ago, he had been cleaning a coffee station. Now he was going to be picked up by a company car and driven to a Manhattan tailor by the CEO's personal driver. His head was spinning. He walked toward the boardroom door, past his cleaning cart in the hallway. He paused. He looked back at Victoria. "Ma'am Victoria, what about my cart?" Victoria looked at the cart, looked at Daniel, looked back at the cart. "Leave it, Daniel." "But someone needs to—" "Someone will. But it won't be you. Not anymore." Daniel stood there for a long moment, looking at the cart, at the blue plastic handle, at the yellow mop bucket, at the squeaky wheel that had announced his arrival every night for 4 years. He took a breath, he turned away from it, and he walked toward the elevator without looking back. Brandon caught up to him in the hallway. "Mr. Martinez, the driver's pulling up in 4 minutes. What's your home address?" Daniel gave him the address, a small 2-bedroom apartment in Astoria, Queens. Brandon typed it into his phone without flinching. They rode the elevator down 42 floors in silence. When the doors opened on the lobby, the night security guard Carlos did a double-take at Daniel, still in his janitor's uniform, walking alongside a man in a tailored suit who was clearly escorting him somewhere important. "Daniel, you okay, amigo?" Daniel stopped. He walked over to Carlos. He hugged him. Carlos hugged him back, confused. "¿Qué pasa, man?" Daniel pulled back. His eyes were shining. "Todo cambió, Carlos. Todo cambió esta noche." Everything changed, Carlos. Everything changed tonight. Carlos looked at him, then at Brandon, then back at Daniel. "En serio? En serio." Daniel walked toward the lobby doors. A black Mercedes was pulling up at the curb outside. The driver, a man in a dark suit, stepped out and opened the rear passenger door. Daniel paused at the threshold. He looked at the glass doors. At his own reflection. A 43-year-old janitor in a navy blue uniform with his name stitched over the pocket, for the last time. Then, he stepped through the doors, climbed into the back of the Mercedes, and let himself be driven home to his sleeping son. The Mercedes pulled up in front of Daniel's apartment building at 2:26 in the morning. Brandon stayed in the back seat. The driver offered to walk Daniel to the door, but Daniel politely declined. "Thank you, both of you. I'll be ready at 6:30. "Yes, sir," the driver said. Brandon leaned forward. "Daniel." "Yes." "Get some sleep. And hey, for what it's worth, I was one of the ones laughing when you walked in tonight. I'm sorry." Daniel shook his head. "You don't have to apologize, Brandon." "Yeah, I do. I'll see you at 6:30. Daniel closed the car door. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, watching the Mercedes drive away, its taillights disappearing into the empty street. Then he turned and walked up the 3 concrete steps to his front door. His hands were shaking as he pulled out his keys. He let himself in as quietly as he could. The apartment was small, a living room that doubled as a kitchen, a narrow hallway, 2 bedrooms, and 1 bathroom. It smelled like the pasta sauce Lucas had made himself for dinner. It smelled like home. Daniel set his keys on the counter. He took off his janitor's uniform shirt and folded it carefully. He walked down the hallway and stopped outside Lucas's bedroom. The door was cracked open. The little blue nightlight, the one Elena had bought when Lucas was 3 years old, the one Lucas had refused to give up even now at 12, was casting soft shadows across the bedroom. Daniel pushed the door open silently. Lucas was asleep on his side, one arm curled around his stuffed dinosaur, the other hanging off the edge of the bed. His hair was messy. His mouth was slightly open. A library book about space exploration was lying open on his chest. Daniel stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then he walked in quietly, lifted the book off Lucas's chest, placed it on the nightstand, and pulled the blanket up over his son's shoulders. Lucas stirred. His eyes blinked open, unfocused. "Dad?" "Hey, champ. What time is it?" "Late. Go back to sleep." "Did you get home okay?" "Yeah, buddy. I got home fine. Everything's fine. Everything's really good." Lucas's eyes were already closing again. "Okay, Dad. I love you, Lucas." "Love you too." Daniel sat on the edge of the bed. He watched his son's breathing slow. He watched the little rise and fall of his chest. He watched the faint shadow of Elena in the shape of Lucas's nose, the curve of his ear, the way he slept with his fist half closed. And then, very quietly alone in the dark, Daniel Martinez put his face in his hands and cried. Not the quiet, controlled tears he had shed in the boardroom. Not the proud, dignified tears he had kept in check in front of Victoria Harrington and her executives. These were different. These were the tears he had been holding in for 15 years. The tears he hadn't cried when he left Heidelberg. The tears he hadn't cried when Elena got her diagnosis. The tears he hadn't cried at her funeral because Lucas had needed him to be strong. The tears he hadn't cried when he put on the janitor's uniform for the first time, knowing in his heart that he was walking away from the man he had spent his entire adult life becoming. All of it came out now in silence next to his sleeping son. He cried until he couldn't cry anymore. Then he wiped his face with the sleeve of his undershirt, leaned down and kissed Lucas gently on the forehead. "I'm going to do right by you, buddy," he whispered. "I promise." He stood up. He walked back to his own bedroom. He set an alarm for 5:45 a.m. He lay down on top of the comforter fully clothed, and within 90 seconds he was asleep. When the alarm went off 3 hours later, Daniel was already awake. He had been awake for 10 minutes staring at the ceiling, trying to convince himself that the last 12 hours hadn't been a dream, that he hadn't somehow hallucinated the entire encounter, that there really was a black Mercedes coming for him at 6:30. He got up. He showered. He shaved. He looked at himself in the foggy bathroom mirror for a long time. The man staring back at him looked tired. But something in his eyes was different. Something alive. He walked to the kitchen, pulled out a mixing bowl, and started making pancake batter. Lucas wandered out in his pajamas at 6:15, rubbing his eyes. "Dad, why are you up?" "It's Tuesday. Don't you sleep until 9 on Tuesdays?" "I'm making breakfast, champ. Chocolate chip pancakes." "Told you didn't?" Lucas climbed onto a stool at the counter. He watched his father flip a pancake with practiced ease. "Dad, what happened last night?" Daniel paused, spatula in hand. "What do you mean? You came home really late, and your voice sounded funny on the phone. Like, I don't know. Like something happened." Daniel turned off the stove. He slid the pancake onto a plate. He set the plate in front of Lucas. He sat down on the stool next to his son. "Lucas, something did happen last night." "Something bad?" "No, buddy, something good." Lucas took a bite of pancake. "Like what?" Daniel looked at his son. At this 12-year-old boy with messy hair and syrup on his chin, who had been the entire reason Daniel had kept going for the last 4 years. The reason he had clocked in every night. The reason he had swallowed his pride every morning. The reason he was still alive. "I got offered a new job, Lucas." Lucas stopped chewing. A different job, like not janitor. Not janitor. "What kind of job?" "A translator job. At the big company. The one I work at now." Wait, the people in the suits, the fancy people." "Yes, buddy, the fancy people." What happened?" Daniel took a breath. "There was a big contract, a really important one, from Germany, and nobody could translate it. And I studied German a long time ago. Before I met your mom. I used to speak it every day." "Yeah, I know." "So I offered to help, and I translated it for them. And it turned out the contract had some really bad things hidden inside it. Things that would have hurt their company. And I helped them see those things. And the CEO, she offered me a job. A big job." Lucas's eyes were wide. "How big?" "Really big, buddy." Like how much money?" "Enough that we're gonna be okay, Lucas. For a long, long time. Enough that you don't have to worry. Enough that you can go to that science camp. And the one after that. And the one after that. Enough that you can go to college. Wherever you want. Whatever you want to study." Lucas set down his fork. "Dad, is this real?" "It's real, champ." Like you promise. I promise. Lucas stared at him. His chin started to tremble. Daniel reached out and pulled his son into a hug. Lucas held on to him tight. Didn't say anything. Just held on. When Lucas finally pulled back, his eyes were shining. Mom would be really happy, Dad. Daniel's voice caught. Yeah, buddy. I think she would be. Are you happy? Daniel nodded. I'm happy, Lucas. For the first time in a long, long time. I'm happy. Lucas wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, picked up his fork again, took another bite of pancake. Dad. Yeah, this is the best pancake you ever made. Daniel laughed. A real laugh. The first real laugh he had laughed in years. Eat up, champ. Finish your breakfast. I've got to go to work. At 6:30 a.m., sharp the buzzer rang. Daniel was already dressed in his best shirt, a button-down he had bought for Elena's funeral 4 years ago and worn exactly twice since. He had on his best slacks and his only pair of leather shoes. They weren't the navy suit Victoria had demanded, but they were the best he owned. He figured the tailor could take care of the rest. He kissed Lucas on the forehead. I'm going to be home late tonight, buddy. I'll call you when I can. Mrs. Alvarez is going to take you to school like always. Okay, Dad? I love you, Lucas. I love you too, Dad. Daniel walked out of the apartment, closed the door behind him, walked down the 3 concrete steps. Brandon was standing next to the Mercedes, holding open the rear passenger door. Good morning, Mr. Martinez. Good morning, Brandon. Ready. Daniel looked up at the apartment building. At the window of his son's bedroom on the 2nd floor. He nodded slowly. Yes, I'm ready. The ride to Barney's took 40 minutes in the morning traffic. Brandon spent most of it on his phone coordinating with someone named Enzo, apparently the tailor, and confirming arrival times. At 7:15, the Mercedes pulled up in front of a discreet unmarked side entrance of the department store. Enzo was waiting for them. He was a slender Italian man in his 60s with silver hair and a cloth measuring tape draped around his neck. He took one look at Daniel and clicked his tongue. Mr. Martinez, you have beautiful shoulders, very broad, natural athletic frame. We work with this. Come. He led Daniel through a dark hallway into a private fitting room. The room smelled like wool and leather and cedar. There were suits hanging on 3 different racks. Ms. Harrington, she called me at 5 a.m. this morning. 5 a.m. You know what I said to her? I said, Victoria who dies. She laughed. Victoria Harrington laughed. I have known her 22 years. She does not laugh. Whoever you are, sir, you must be very, very special. Daniel smiled tiredly. I'm just trying to help, sir. Enzo, please. Enzo. Enzo held up a charcoal gray suit, held it against Daniel's shoulders, frowned, held up a navy suit, smiled. Ah, yes, this one, navy. Always navy. It is a color of authority without aggression. Try it. Daniel tried it on. He looked in the mirror. He didn't recognize himself. The man staring back was lean, sharp, professional. The suit fit perfectly. The fabric was soft, heavy, expensive. His shoulders looked broader. His posture looked straighter. His face looked... He didn't know what it looked like. Different. Older. Maybe younger. Both at the same time. Enzo pinned a few small adjustments at the cuffs and the waist. He worked quickly. Within 15 minutes, he had everything marked. Within another 15 minutes, a seamstress in the back had made the adjustments. Within 45 minutes, Daniel was fully dressed in a tailored navy suit, a crisp white shirt, a burgundy tie, and a pair of polished black Oxfords that fit his feet like they had been made for him. Enzo stepped back. He placed his hand over his heart. Mr. Martinez, you look like a director of international contracts. Thank you, Enzo. Go change the world. At 8:10 a.m., the Mercedes pulled up to the front entrance of Harrington Tower. Brandon got out first. He opened the door for Daniel. Daniel stepped out onto the sidewalk. The same sidewalk he had walked on every night for 4 years, wearing his navy blue uniform, his name stitched above the pocket. Now he was wearing a different navy. And his name was stitched on nothing, but everyone was about to know it. Carlos, the security guard, was at the front desk. His eyes went wide when Daniel walked through the revolving doors. Daniel. Good morning, Carlos. Dios mío. You look... I know. Carlos grinned. His eyes were wet. Mírate, hermano. Mírate. Look at you, brother. Look at you. I'll see you tonight, Carlos. Yes, sir. Yes, Mr. Martinez. Daniel walked toward the elevators. Brandon stayed close behind him. Several employees on their way into the building turned to look at him as he passed. Some of them recognized him. He could see it in their faces. The flash of confusion, the double take, the slow realization that the man in the tailored suit was the same man who had cleaned their break room last week. A few of them opened their mouths as if to say something, then closed them. One woman, a receptionist named Diane, actually whispered Daniel as he walked past. He smiled at her, kept walking, pressed the elevator button. The doors opened. He stepped inside with Brandon. Pressed 42. The elevator rose silently through the building. At 8:17 a.m., the elevator doors opened onto the 42nd floor. Catherine Yamaguchi was standing there waiting. She was wearing a dark suit and a tense expression. Daniel, thank God. Richter landed at 1:15 like we thought. He checked into the Pierre. He called 10 minutes ago. He's in a car. ETA to the building is 8:35. Victoria. In the boardroom. Michael is with her. She's been there since 6. Come on. They walked down the corridor. Daniel's cleaning cart was no longer in the hallway. Someone had moved it. He didn't know where. He didn't ask. Catherine pushed open the boardroom door. Victoria was standing at the head of the long table, hands on the back of her chair, reading something Michael Klein had put in front of her. She was wearing a black suit, a cream blouse, and a pearl necklace. Her hair was pulled back tight. Her face was composed. She looked up when Daniel walked in. Her expression didn't change. Her eyes did. She stood up straight. She walked around the table. She stopped in front of him. Daniel. Victoria. She stepped back, looked him up and down, nodded slowly. Enzo is a genius. He was very kind. He charges $6,000 for a bespoke suit. Don't thank him too much. I expect it to last you a decade. Daniel smiled. I'll take care of it, Victoria. Good. She turned and walked back to the table, picked up a thick manila folder, held it out to him. Everything Michael and I put together last night. Your notes, the translated clauses, the termination letter, the parallel filing for Frankfurt, the memo to the board. It's all in there. You know what's in there because you wrote half of it. Familiarize yourself with the order. You'll be walking Hans Richter through it. Daniel took the folder. Understood. Richter will arrive in approximately 15 minutes. When he does, I'll meet him in the lobby. Brandon will escort him up. I'll introduce him to the room. Then I'll turn the floor over to you. You will conduct the meeting from there, in German or English, whichever you prefer. It's your call. Daniel nodded. German. He should hear it in his own language. There's no escape for him then. Agreed. Michael Klein cleared his throat. A word of warning, Daniel. Hans Richter is one of the most ruthless corporate lawyers in Europe. He represents some of the worst players on the continent. He will try to intimidate you. He will try to patronize you. He will try to sow doubt about your credentials. He will absolutely 100% try to rattle you. He can try. Daniel, I'm serious. This man has destroyed careers. I've seen him reduce federal judges to tears. Daniel looked at Michael Klein. Mr. Klein, with all due respect, I buried my wife 4 years ago. I pushed a mop for 15 years while the world ignored me. I have not slept a full night in a decade. I have a 12-year-old son at home who has been waiting for a father who could hold his head up. Hans Richter can say anything he wants to me. Nothing he says will land. Michael Klein stared at him. Then slowly he nodded. Okay. Okay, Daniel. Okay. Victoria allowed herself a small smile. Brandon, Richter is 2 minutes out. Go to the lobby, meet him, bring him up. And Brandon, yes. Be polite, be professional, be warm even. Shake his hand, offer him water. Let him think for just a little bit longer that he's about to close the biggest deal of his career. Understood. Brandon left. The room was quiet. Victoria turned to Daniel. How are you feeling? Calm, Victoria. Really? Not even a little nervous. Daniel shook his head slowly. Last night when I walked into this room, I was terrified. I thought I was going to lose my job. I thought I was going to lose my dignity. I thought I was going to walk out of here and never come back. He paused. This morning, I already have everything I was afraid to lose. I already have my dignity back. I already have my family's future. I already have my purpose back. Hans Richter can't take any of that from me. He can only try, and he'll fail. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. Daniel? Yes. My father started this company in 1971. He built it from nothing. He sold his wife's wedding ring to make rent on the first office. He worked himself to death by the time he was 62. I inherited it at 31. I have run this company for 22 years. And in all that time, I have never not once been prouder to walk into a boardroom than I am right now, standing next to you. Daniel couldn't speak. He simply nodded. The boardroom door opened. Brandon stepped in. He's here. Daniel set the folder on the table. He stood up straight. He buttoned his suit jacket. And he turned toward the door to face the man who had tried to destroy Harrington Global, and who was about to find out in his own language exactly why he had just lost. Hans Richter walked into the boardroom at 8:36 a.m. He was taller than Daniel expected. Early 60s, broad-shouldered, silver hair combed back severely, a charcoal double-breasted suit that looked like it had been tailored in Milan, a face that seemed permanently set in an expression of polite contempt. He was carrying a leather portfolio and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Victoria, so good to see you again. His English was precise, clipped lightly accented. I apologize for my unexpected arrival. I simply wanted to be here for such an important day, for both our companies. Victoria shook his hand. Hans, please, come in, sit down. Can we offer you coffee? Black, no sugar, thank you. Brandon poured him a cup. Hans Richter sat down at the long table. He placed his leather portfolio in front of him. He looked around the boardroom, taking in the faces. Catherine, Richard, Michael Klein. And then finally his eyes stopped on Daniel. Daniel was standing behind his chair at the far end of the table. Still. Calm. Watching. Hans Richter studied him for a moment. Victoria, I don't believe I've had the pleasure. No hands. You haven't. Victoria's voice was perfectly pleasant. Please allow me to introduce you to Mr. Daniel Martinez, my Director of International Contracts. Hans Richter raised his eyebrows. Director of International Contracts? How interesting. This is a new position, perhaps. Very new. I see. He extended his hand across the table. Herr Martinez, a pleasure. Herr Richter. Daniel shook his hand, released it, sat down. Hans Richter took a sip of coffee. He set the cup down carefully. He looked at Victoria. Shall we begin? I believe we have signatures to exchange. Actually, Hans. Victoria smiled politely. Before we discuss signatures, I'd like Mr. Martinez to walk us through a few items in the contract. Just a final review. I'm sure you don't mind. Of course not. Though I must say our two legal teams have already been quite thorough. I'm not sure what more there is to discuss. Humor me. Hans Richter nodded graciously. Certainly. Victoria turned to Daniel. Mr. Martinez, the floor is yours. Daniel picked up the folder. He opened it. He looked at Hans Richter. And then in perfect, flawless, unaccented German, he began to speak. Herr Richter, mein Name ist Daniel Martinez. Ich werde heute die Verhandlung auf Deutsch führen, weil ich glaube, dass es in Ihrer Muttersprache keinen Raum für Missverständnisse gibt. Mr. Richter, my name is Daniel Martinez. I will be conducting today's negotiation in German because I believe there is no room for misunderstanding in your native language." The polite smile on Hans Richter's face froze. It didn't disappear, not immediately. But something behind it went very, very still. He answered in German. "Ihr Deutsch ist ausgezeichnet, Herr Martinez. Wo haben Sie studiert?" "Your German is excellent, Mr. Martinez. Where did you study?" "Heidelberg. Germanic linguistics. My doctoral thesis was on the evolution of Middle-High German legal language, which, as you can imagine, has given me a certain appreciation for how modern German legal drafting is constructed." Hans Richter did not answer immediately. Daniel continued still in German. "I'd like to begin on page 14, Mr. Richter. Section 3.2, subsection C. Your firm translated this clause to our counsel as a standard non-compete provision. I'd like to hear in your own words whether you believe that translation is accurate." Hans Richter took a slow breath. He was a man who had spent 40 years controlling rooms. He knew instantly and completely that he had lost this one. But he was also a man who did not go down without a fight. He switched to English. "Victoria, I must say this is highly unusual. If there are concerns about translation accuracy, it would be appropriate to raise them through our respective legal teams, not in a live negotiation setting. I'm sure Mr. Martinez is very talented, but—" Daniel interrupted calmly, quietly, and still in German. "Mr. Richter, we will continue in German. If you choose to respond in English, I will simply translate your responses for the room. But I believe you know, and I know that the only reason you wrote this contract in German is because you were counting on no one in this room being able to read it. That advantage no longer applies." The room was absolutely silent. Michael Klein was holding his breath. Victoria wasn't smiling, but her eyes were brighter than they had been in 20 years. Hans Richter set his coffee cup down with slightly too much force. "Very well, Mr. Martinez. In German, what is your question?" Section 3.2, subsection C. Does your firm stand by the translation that was provided to Harrington Global's counsel? The translation provided was summary in nature. A summary that described a liability transfer provision as a non-compete clause. Is that standard practice at your firm, Mr. Richter? Mr. Martinez, let me help you, Mr. Richter. The actual content of Section 3.2, subsection C, is a liability transfer provision. Upon signing, Harrington Global would inherit all existing lawsuits pending litigation and undisclosed environmental obligations of Bauer Steinman, GmbH. My research puts the estimated exposure at somewhere between $80 and $120 million. Yes or no, is my understanding of this clause accurate? Hans Richter's jaw tightened. Your understanding is technically accurate. Thank you. Let's move to page 31. Section 7.1, paragraph 4. The payment structure clause. Your firm described this to our counsel as a standard 3-installment schedule. Do you stand by that description? The description was accurate in essence. Was it, because what I see on page 31 is a Zinsstaffelregelung mit aufgeschobener Fälligkeit, a cascading interest provision with deferred maturity? If Harrington misses a single payment by a single day, the balance doubles. If the doubled balance cannot be paid within 30 days, your company becomes the majority shareholder of Harrington Global. Is that an accurate reading of the clause, Mr. Richter? Hans Richter was silent for a long moment. Mr. Martinez, I will not sit here and be... Answer the question, Mr. Richter. The Herr Richter who had walked into the boardroom 20 minutes earlier was gone. The man sitting across from Daniel now was pale, tight. His fingers were clenched around the edge of his leather portfolio. The clause reads as you have described it. Thank you. Let's move on. For the next hour and 40 minutes, Daniel walked Hans Richter through every single clause he had flagged. He did not raise his voice. He did not accuse. He did not gloat. He simply asked questions one after another in elegant, precise German, and he forced Hans Richter, a man who had spent his career hiding behind language, to confirm on the record exactly what every single hidden clause meant. By 9:30, Catherine was recording the meeting on her laptop. By 9:45, Michael Klein had pulled out his phone and was texting someone furiously. By 10:10, Hans Richter had stopped trying to deflect. He was simply answering ja or nine as Daniel moved through the document page by page. At 10:22, Daniel closed the folder. Mr. Richter, I believe you understand why Harrington Global will not be signing this contract today or on any other day. Yes, Mr. Martinez. Good. Daniel opened the folder one last time. He pulled out a single document, a 2-page letter, in German, on Harrington Global letterhead. He slid it across the table. This is a termination notice. It has been signed by Ms. Harrington this morning and filed this morning with the Frankfurt Commercial Court. It cites material misrepresentation and breach of good faith negotiations. A copy is on its way to your firm's Munich office by registered post. Hans Richter picked up the letter. He read the first line. He read the second line. Then he set it down without finishing. He looked up at Victoria. Victoria, please, there must be a way to... Victoria held up a single hand. Hans? Yes. Shut up. Hans Richter shut up. Victoria stood up. She walked the length of the table, slowly, her heels clicking on the hardwood. She stopped at the chair next to Hans Richter. She leaned down. She spoke softly in English right next to his ear. Hans, listen carefully. You are going to walk out of this building today, and you are going to get back on your plane, and you are going to fly home to Munich. And when you land, you are going to go to your senior partners, and you are going to tell them exactly what happened in this room. You are going to tell them that you flew 15 hours across the Atlantic to watch an American CEO sign her own death warrant, and instead, you sat across from a janitor who exposed every single lie you tried to sell us. Hans Richter's face had gone the color of wet paper. And then, Hans, you are going to tell your senior partners this. Harrington Global is going to personally fund the legal defense of any American company that is approached by Bauer Steinman or its subsidiaries with a contract that contains any of the language Mr. Martinez identified today. Every single clause. Every single trap. Mr. Klein's firm is preparing a public white paper as we speak. It will be distributed to every major law firm in the United States by the end of this week. If you or your firm ever attempt this again anywhere with anyone under any name, we will know, and we will be waiting. She stood up straight. Have a safe flight home, Hans. Brandon will escort you to the lobby. Hans Richter stood up slowly. He picked up his leather portfolio. He picked up the termination letter and tucked it inside. He looked at Daniel one last time. Herr Martinez. Herr Richter. You have impressive skills. Daniel nodded once. Goodbye, Herr Richter. Hans Richter walked out of the boardroom. Brandon followed him. The door clicked shut. And then, for the first time in 19 hours, Daniel Martinez exhaled. He sat down heavily in his chair. He put his hands flat on the table, and for a moment no one said anything. Then Richard Kendrick started to clap. Slowly. Once. Twice. 3 times. Catherine joined in. Then Michael Klein. Then Victoria. Within seconds, every person in the boardroom was on their feet clapping, and it went on for a long time. Daniel stayed seated. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know where to look. He simply sat there, his hands flat on the table, his eyes shining as an entire room of executives gave him a standing ovation. Victoria walked over to him. She put her hand on his shoulder. Daniel. Victoria. Go home. Be with your son. Tomorrow we start your real work. Yes, Victoria. He stood up. He walked out of the boardroom. The cleaning cart was gone. He didn't know where it had been moved to. He didn't ask. He walked down the corridor to the elevator. He pressed the button. The doors opened. He stepped inside. He pressed L. As the elevator descended, he caught his reflection in the polished brass panel. A man in a tailored navy suit, broad shoulders, straight back, eyes clear and tired and alive. He didn't recognize himself, and for the first time in 15 years, he liked what he saw. 3 months later, the changes in Daniel Martinez's life had become permanent in ways that still occasionally took his breath away. He had moved Lucas out of the small apartment in Astoria and into a 3-bedroom brownstone in Park Slope. It had a small backyard, a fireplace, and a study on the second floor that Daniel had lined with bookshelves. The books had come out of storage, the ones he had packed away 15 years earlier when Elena got sick. Academic texts in German, Dutch, Swedish. Dog-eared copies of Goethe and Rilke. A leather-bound edition of the Nibelungenlied that had been a wedding gift from Elena's grandmother. He had thought those books would sit in boxes for the rest of his life. Now they were back on shelves, and he read from them most nights. Lucas had transferred to a private school in Brooklyn that specialized in science and technology. He had joined the astronomy club. He was already talking about going to MIT someday. He came home every afternoon with homework spread across the kitchen counter and stories about his day that Daniel listened to with a patience he had never before had the energy for. At work, Daniel had slowly built a department from scratch. He had hired 3 junior translators, all of them like him. People with advanced degrees who had fallen through the cracks of the American economy. A Syrian woman who had been a constitutional scholar in Damascus and was now driving for a rideshare app. A former Brazilian diplomat who had been managing a coffee cart in Midtown. A young Vietnamese woman with a doctorate in international law who had been working retail in Queens for 3 years. Daniel had personally tracked them down. He had personally interviewed them. He had personally offered them salaries that made them cry. At his first quarterly meeting with the board, Victoria had introduced him with a single sentence. "This is Daniel Martinez. He is the reason we still have a company." The board had given him a standing ovation before he had said a single word. On a cold Friday evening in February, Daniel came home from work and found Lucas sitting at the kitchen counter with his homework spread out. Lucas looked up. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Always, buddy." "Why did you take the janitor job?" Daniel sat down on the stool across from his son. He thought about the question for a long moment. "Because I was scared, Lucas." "Scared of what?" Of what would happen if I tried to be who I used to be and I failed. Your mom was sick. I was exhausted. I had you to take care of. And I don't know. Something broke inside me, buddy. I didn't trust myself anymore. I didn't believe I could be a professor or a scholar or any of the things I had worked my whole life to become. I thought if I just take the smallest, safest, most invisible job I can find, I won't disappoint anybody. I won't fail. I won't let you down. Lucas was quiet. Then he said, "Dad, you never would have let me down." Daniel's throat tightened. "I know that now, Lucas. I didn't know it then." Are you happy now?" "I'm happy, buddy. Yeah, I'm really happy." Lucas looked back down at his homework. He tapped his pencil against the counter a few times. Then he looked back up. "Dad? Yeah? I'm really proud of you." Daniel couldn't speak for a moment. He reached across the counter and put his hand on his son's head. "I'm really proud of you too, champ." That night, after Lucas had gone to bed, Daniel walked into his study. He pulled down a worn leather notebook from the top shelf. He opened it to the last page he had written on 15 years earlier in a tiny apartment in Heidelberg 3 days before Elena's diagnosis. The page was the last chapter of his unfinished doctoral thesis. He sat down at his desk. He pulled out a pen, and for the first time in 15 years, he started writing again. He wrote until 3 in the morning. He wrote about everything he had thought he'd forgotten. The old German jurists, the medieval contract traditions, the way language could be used to protect and the way language could be used to destroy. He wrote about a janitor who learned both lessons the hard way in one night in a boardroom 42 floors above Manhattan. He did not know yet that this writing would eventually become a book. He did not know yet that the book would be published 2 years later by a prestigious academic press with a foreword by Victoria Harrington. He did not know yet that it would become required reading at Harvard Law School, Yale Law School, and a small liberal arts university that had quietly offered him an honorary doctorate. He did not know any of that. All he knew that night was that his hand was moving across the paper, and it was moving with a confidence it had not known in 15 years, and somewhere down the hall, his son was asleep in a warm bed in a safe house, dreaming of stars and planets and futures that were at long last fully within his reach. A year after the meeting with Hans Richter on a quiet Saturday afternoon in April, Daniel took Lucas to Elena's grave. They brought flowers, white roses because they had been her favorite. They stood at the headstone for a long time, neither of them speaking. Finally, Lucas said, "Do you think she knows Dad?" Daniel put his arm around his son's shoulders. "I think she's always known Buddy." "Do you think she's proud?" Daniel looked down at the grave, at Elena's name, at the dates, at the small engraved line beneath them, a line she had chosen herself in the last weeks of her life, a line in Spanish, her native language, the language of her childhood and her dreams. El amor no se mide en tiempo, se mide en verdad. Love is not measured in time, it is measured in truth. "Yes, Lucas," Daniel said quietly. "I think she's proud. I think she's proud of both of us." They stood there for a long time. Then they walked back to the car, and Daniel drove his son home. He was 44 years old. He was alive. He was respected. He was loved. He had a son who was proud of him. He had work that mattered. He had the quiet, unshakable knowledge that he had at long last become the man Elena had always believed he could be. A man is not what the world calls him. A man is what he chooses to be the night he is given the chance to prove it. And Daniel Martinez, once a janitor at Harrington Tower, now a director, a scholar, a father, a survivor, had made his choice. He had picked up the contract. He had walked into the room. He had spoken the truth. And from that moment on, no one, not Hans Richter, not the ghosts of his own doubt, not the 15 years of silence he had buried himself beneath, could ever make him small again.